Hey everybody, welcome to Random Fandom. This is your host Mayhem. This is my little show where I like to riff on everything fandom related and pop culture related, past and present. And today's episode, we're going to delve a little bit into the past, back to my childhood, the late 80s and early 90s. There was one institution back then, and even before that, that was just something that every kid did all the time, no matter what. And it was Saturday morning cartoons. That was an institution back in my childhood. No matter who you were, no matter what you did, where you lived, you got up early on Saturday mornings to watch the Saturday morning cartoons. That's how you knew it was the weekend. That's how you knew you were in for a good time. You get up at the crack of dawn, you flip on the TV, and you were just in for a rich cornucopia of animated goodness. Sadly, that's gone by the wayside nowadays. Pretty much right after my childhood, apparently. Looking back on it and looking up stuff online, I find out that really at around the late 90s, turn of the millennium, Saturday morning cartoons pretty well dropped off. I mean, you've got the certain channels that are all about kids programming anyway. Cartoon Network, Disney Channel, Disney XD. They're showing kids stuff 24 hours a day anyway. So it's not like you can't find cartoons on Saturday mornings, but the institution of Saturday morning cartoons on the big four networks is completely gone. I don't think there's hardly any cartoons on the big four networks anymore on Saturday mornings, which is really sad. And so I'm going to give, in this episode, my little homage and send up to Saturday morning cartoons. Now, even if you're just sticking to the time period when I was a kid, late 80s, early 90s, even in that, maybe 10-year block, there's still dozens and dozens of Saturday morning cartoons, because a lot of them would only go for, one season, 2 or 3, and they had a lot of spots to fill because it was really from, 5 a.m. to noon or past noon every Saturday, half-hour block at a piece, so they had a lot of spaces to fill, and there was just tons of shows. So in this episode, I'm not going to really delve into the shows that were big-time legacy shows. That, there are shows that everybody knows and everybody remembers. Transformers, G.i. Joe, stuff like that. The superhero shows, X-Men the animated series, Spider-Man the animated series, everything in the DC animated universe. Those are like legacy shows. They were based on something that had already existed for many years, and they're going to continue to exist beyond the cartoons. Obviously, now they're into the movies, TV shows, and all that kind of stuff. No, this is going to be my homage to the forgotten Saturday morning cartoons, the unsung shows, the shows that you may have not thought about in a decade or more, but maybe you'll remember some of these as I go through them. So the shows that were original ideas, but then ultimately, once they were canceled, died and no longer exist in any form. So in no particular order, no ranking here, just some of the ones that I remember being some of my favorites. In 1996, there was a little show called Geeker. This was a weird little show. It was a post-apocalyptic action/comedy cartoon show. So it was set in the future, and there was this evil ruler despot who was looking to genetically engineer the perfect soldier, superpowered soldier, and he created one. He had one success in creating one, but before he could give it its final programming and turn it into his ultimate weapon, it was stolen by a cybernetic freedom fighter named Lady Macbeth and her partner, intelligent Tyrannosaurus Rex. And he was called G.e.e.K.e.R., and without his final programming that he was supposed to get, he was just a lunatic. He was a very cartoonish character. He was crazy and did wacky stuff. He fell in love with Lady Macbeth, and that's why he always stuck around with her. So it was this trio of an intelligent dinosaur, a cybernetically enhanced freedom fighter woman, and then this hyperly powerful super soldier who was absolutely cartoonishly insane, fighting against this evil despot. So it was just a wacky little show, and I enjoyed it. It was only on for one season. It went very short amount of time. Blink and you would have missed it. But I always have remembered it, and I've never been able to find it anywhere. In my time since I was a child, I've looked into finding some of these shows that I watched as a kid. but Geeker's one I've never been able to find reproduced in any form since I was a kid. Another show that I remember was on from 1988 to 1990, Denver the Last Dinosaur. Now, I don't remember too many of the episodes too much, but I really remember the theme song to it. That's the kind of theme song that's just stuck in my head over the years. Every once in a while, I'll just be doing something completely unrelated to cartoons or anything, and Denver the Last Dinosaur theme song will pop into my head, and it'll be stuck there the rest of the day, and I'll just keep singing it. I watched that show a lot. I went about 3 seasons. I enjoyed that one. You gotta love the idea of a bunch of kids meeting a dinosaur, and he becomes their friend, sort of their, like, team mascot or something, and they have wacky adventures with an intelligent dinosaur. Wasn't that every kid's fantasy back in their younger childhood days, meeting a dinosaur and making it your pet? That was a great story. Another one, this one actually was based on something originally, but it was still kind of an original idea. Captain N, the Game Master. Based on the Nintendo Entertainment System, it was a story of a young kid who was sucked into his Nintendo, and he brought in his Nintendo gun and Nintendo controller, and those gave him sort of superpowers in the game world that he was stuck in. He befriended a bunch of classic video game characters like Simon from Castlevania and Kid Icarus, and he fought against a bunch of classic video game villains. And so it was a great little show, and I was a video gamer when I was a kid. I had a Nintendo Entertainment System, and I had a lot of the games that were featured in the show. So that was an enjoyable little show. And another thing that every kid would have loved to have done if they played a lot of video games were to be sucked into their video game so they could save the video game world. So it really appealed to my imagination as a child. So that one was sort of based on something. You know, they used the Nintendo Entertainment System as the bedrock foundation for that show, but it was still, you know, something that nobody had really done before, kid being sucked into his video game. Another completely original show that I've never seen anything like it before or since, Pirates of Dark Water, was on from 1991 to 1993. Not a comedy this time. This was a straight action cartoon. It was set in a fictional world that was sort of magical / alien, and it was about a prince who was trying to stop this so-called dark water that had invaded their planet and was slowly taking everything over. This was kind of like a liquid version of The Nothing from Neverending Story, if you've ever seen that. It was just this blackness that was consuming everything and growing bigger and bigger. So it was a threat to the entire world, and this prince had to find these certain treasures that would be able to destroy the dark water, and he was helped by a bunch of pirates and interesting characters, and he had to fight against other pirates in his quest to find these treasures. So, really interesting sort of show, and it seemed like the kind of thing that would have spawned an entire franchise around it. You know, it seemed like there would have been video games based on this, and this seems like the kind of thing they could have turned into a movie. I mean, I can certainly imagine, with all the technology improvements since then and CGI enhancements, a Pirates of Dark Water live-action movie of this alien world that's being consumed by this dark water, and these certain heroes are on a quest to stop it. I mean, that seems just perfect for the kind of fantasy movies they make nowadays. I could see that being a big summer blockbuster. But it was on for about 3 seasons, it ended, and ultimately nothing ever came from it again. I would kind of love to see a resurgence of Pirates of Dark Water. They could bring it back and update it and make it new. I think it would do well myself. Another show that's in that same vein of pure action, and probably something they could have kept with, was Skeleton Warriors. Skeleton Warriors, just like Pirates of Dark Water, set on a fictional world that had sort of magic and interesting characters, not so much technology-based, but it was more of a sword and sorcery type of situation, where this kingdom was plagued by a bunch of undead skeletons, and It was about a group of heroes who got certain superpowers and had to fight back against them. I like Skeleton Warriors. I had a lot of the Skeleton Warriors action figures. I guess that show really just captured my interest, and I asked for a bunch of action figures from the Skeleton Warrior cartoon from my parents, and they got me a lot of them. So even to this day, I have a lot of skeletal action figures in a box back at home somewhere in the attic. So it was only on one season. It was another one of those shows that was really blink and you'll miss it, here one day, gone the next. But I enjoyed it, because I like those sort of action-based heroes fighting monsters type of shows. Another show that was very similar to that came along in 1997. It's called Mummies Alive. This was a show about a kid who was a reincarnation of an ancient pharaoh, and he was being attacked by all of these evil Egyptian-themed monsters. So he got 4 protectors, and they were magical mummies who all had certain superpowers based around various animals. There was one who would get powers of a ram, and he was really big and strong, and one who got powers of a snake, and he was a martial artist. One who got powers of an eagle, and he could fly. And so this was another attempt at a sort of non-comic book superhero group, because they all had superpowers and they all had personalities. It wasn't like they were brain-dead zombie-type mummies. They all had personalities and told jokes and everything. So it was an attempt to sort of make a new superhero team, but ultimately it didn't do anything, didn't go anywhere. It was only on one season for 1 year in 1997, and then kaputs, it's gone. A show that was something that I never thought I would ever see them do, I'd never even conceived of this show before it came on, was Secrets of the Crypt-Keeper's Haunted House. Now, this was a game show for kids. This was sort of like Double Dare or something. And so that's not exactly something new. There's been dozens of game shows made for kids with kid contestants. The thing here is that it was based on Tales from the Crypt, the very R-rated anthology of horror stories that was originally on HBO. And I had seen a couple of those episodes when this show came on. I'd seen some of the Tales from the Crypt before, because this was in 1996. I was a teenager at that point. And I believe at the time they were showing Tales from the Crypt episodes late at night on network TV. Like, they'd cleaned them up, taken out the really horrible stuff that you might have seen on HBO, but they were showing some of them on Saturday night television. So I'd seen several episodes of Tales from the Crypt at that point. And here we had a game show for kids based around a very hyper-violent, very horror television show that originally debuted on HBO. And I can just imagine being in the office of the TV exec when somebody came and pitched this idea to him. I would have loved to have been in that office, been a fly on that wall, because he was pitching a game show for kids based around something that kids should never, ever see. Tales from the Crypt. And so this game show was on for one season in 1996. I watched it when it was on. I watched, I think, every episode. And the Crypt Keeper was in it, an animatronic Crypt Keeper, but the same guy who did the voice of the Crypt Keeper in the Tales from the Crypt show was doing the voice here. And it was just the weirdest thing. It was like combining oil and water, two things that should have never gone together. Kids game show and terrible horror anthologies. But it seemed to work, or not so much, since it only went one season, but it worked enough for it to get greenlit and turned into a show. And then we come to my favorite, absolute favorite Saturday morning show of all time. Show I miss. I wish they would bring it back. I wish they would make something new of it now. And that is Reboot. Reboot from 1997 to 2001. This was actually on when I got out of my Saturday morning cartoon watching stuff. And it was actually at the tail end of the Saturday morning craze, because this one stretched into the new millennium, 2001. At a time when I was getting to be more interested in sleeping late on Saturdays rather than getting up and watching cartoons, this was something I had to record every week because I loved it. If you've never seen Reboot, at the time it was graphically amazing because it's all computer-generated cartoons, and it was about the inner workings of a computer. That inside a computer there were all these little creatures living in there, electronic creatures, and they were just trying to live a normal life, and they were being attacked by viruses, and they had to have a defender who was named Bob, who came from the interwebs, and he would always have to go into the games, into the computer video games that the user, their conception of God, it was actually just the person who was using the computer in the real world, would input all these games, and if the people inside the computer lost the game, they would all be killed or nullified. So Bob would always have to go inside the games and win them to save the people. This show went on for about 4 seasons, and it went through a bit of a transformation halfway through. About 2 seasons in, start of season 3, it became a little bit more adult-oriented. Not to the point where it had swears or sex or anything like that in it, but it became less comedic and more of a straightforward action kind of a show. And I love the characters in it. I love the animation style. It got to the point where, when it started off, each episode was its own individual episode. They told their own little story. There was a little conflict that they had to overcome in each episode, and they would by the end of the episode. Everything would be wrapped up in a neat little bow by the end of each episode. But by the start about the 3rd season, it started to become an interwoven story. Each episode was connected, and they were always trying to accomplish some larger goal, and that's when it really started getting good as far as I was concerned, when the story became interwoven and it was a multi-episode story arc. That's where I really started to like it. I actually have this one on DVD, this series, and I like to go back and watch it from time to time. It's also on, I believe it's on Netflix as well. So I was glad to see that they brought it back in terms of being able to see it again, but I think it's the kind of thing that they could make a new series out of. I don't know who owns the rights to it at this point, and there's a lot of stuff on Disney XD and Cartoon Network that it would have to compete with, so it's not like there's no other cartoons out there in order for people to watch and get wrapped up in. But Reboot was just my all-time favorite Saturday morning cartoon show. Loved it to death. So those are the ones that I remember the most. Not counting the really hyper-popular ones like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, G.i. Joe, stuff like that. I loved all that stuff too. He-Man back in the day, Thundercats, all that stuff is great. But this was an episode where I really wanted to delve into the unsung shows that were based on sort of nothing beforehand. They were their own original concepts, and once they were gone, they were gone. So let me know what you think some of your favorite Saturday morning cartoon shows were. If you remember some of the ones that I mentioned, if you have some of your own that you remember that I never mentioned here in my episode, let me know about it down below. And I'll see you guys next time around on the next episode of Random Fandom.